And now I give the floor to Antonio Amado. His intervention will be online. He will talk about the rediscovery of natural recognition of fertility from the theology of the body.
Muy buenas tardes. Me toca.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about rediscovering the natural awareness or recognition of fertility based on the theology of the body. But in order to deliver this lecture, firstly, what I would like to do is point out what it is we believe is a theology of the body. Theology of the body refers to the truth of the human person and based on what God has revealed to us. And in this regard, what usually happens is that in order to establish the principles of theology of the body, what we have to do is resort to the first book of the Bible, to Genesis, and in the story that has to do with the creation of the human being in the image of God. The Pope, John Paul II, explained perfectly well how God is like the communion of persons. And God is the mystery of love and the communion of persons, and created the human being in his own image. And in the human being, we can see that image of God as a union of persons in the difference, in the distinction we have between the man and the woman. Both are equal in terms of dignity, and both have been created in God's image as a union of persons. And what the book 1 of Genesis says is that God said to the man and woman that had been created in his image, he said, this statement, well, Pope John Paul II says that this refers that they are personal interlocutors, and he told them not like to animals, because God blesses them by saying, may you be fertile. But when he addresses the human person, he does so in a personal manner and speaks to that person as somebody that is capable of identifying or recognizing what God wants. So God said, be fertile, multiply yourselves, and fill up the earth. And as Pope John Paul II pointed out, this story in the first book of Genesis, in a way, what it does is show the story of creation in an objective manner. So, in other words, what God wanted to establish in the first place. And let's say that this is what he's telling us, what God wanted when he founded or established things. And then in chapter number 2 of Genesis, Pope John Paul II says that what he pointed out was human subjectivity, because as God has created the human being in this manner, what does this mean for human beings? And that's where we come across these magnificent and beautiful elements. It's not good for man to be alone. So God made Adam fall asleep and have a dream. And when he woke up from sleeping, he said, this woman is the flesh of my flesh and the bones of my bones. They were both naked and they were not ashamed. So that's why both left their parents and they formed a single flesh. So all of these elements show what can be found in human subjectivity, in other words, what we have in ourselves. And this corresponds to what God set up when he created us in his image. So what it's all about, it's about rereading, about being able to rediscover what God has constituted, what he's set up by making us in his own image. And what God wanted to do, God wanted us to take charge of this, and God wanted us to participate in this mystery. In this mystery of his creative power as personal beings, as beings that are capable of reading what God has established, as beings that are capable of what God has established in us, and to the order that he's established with the rest of creation. And in this regard, the Pope John Paul II, also pointed out very accurately that the biological cycles, that is, the imminent cycles of fertility or fecundity, form part of the objective language of the person. And they form part of what God created at the beginning when he made us in his image and likeness. And what this is all about, it's all about rediscovering in view of this principle that can be found in God, we can discover what these rhythms mean, or what this natural rhythm is all about. These cycles that occur in human beings and in particular in women. So rediscovering this is fundamental in order to be able to, take charge of what we were told. In other words, be fertile, multiply yourselves, fill up the earth, and subject it. So what it's all about, in essence, it's all about being able to understand what this means from a theological perspective. And Pope Benedictus XVI, at a given point in time when he spoke about this, he was making a comment on Humanae Vitae. What he said is that cycles form part of the time of the person. So, in other words, this is something that is adequate for the personal being, something that corresponds to that person's dignity. And in this manner, and by having these natural rhythms, Saint Thomas said this, and this was also mentioned by Pope John Paul II. Saint Thomas didn't talk about natural rhythms, but what is ordained in nature is, so to speak, a manifestation of providence, of the providence of God. In the same manner, John Paul II says that these natural and imminent rhythms are a signal of the providence of God. So what we have to do, we have to be able to know how positive this or how good this is, but we have to know it from the very beginning, which is in God. And this is the task of rediscovering. But what does God mean? What has God manifested upon establishing in the human being these rhythms, or this fertility, this natural fertility that has its own logic, its own biological logic? So what did God want to do with this? Well, the Pope Benedictus said, well, this has to do with the time of the person. This also has to do with the time of the fidelity or faithfulness. And this also has to do with the fact that persons also, so to speak, have their own time, their own rhythm, because they form part of a superior order. And in fact, what is significant is when you talk about the cycle of women, although there are different durations according to the different people, etc., and so forth. I don't understand a lot about that, but in any case, this, I think it's about 28. Well, that is the same length as a month, and I could say how surprising, how admirable. Well, it's like the moon calendar, which is also the feminine cycle. So in this manner, what you have in the biology of men and women also forms part of the cosmic rhythm, and it also forms part of a superior order that God has created to make known his goodness, and for the human beings to participate in this goodness, not like animals, but rather so that they can participate in this goodness by being able to read what God has given them, so that that man can take this on board responsibly. And I was just thinking about this a couple of days ago, that sometimes we don't notice that this is something that God mentioned to Adam and Eve before they committed that sin. This forms part of the natural order. If there wouldn't have been an original sin, one could assume that man and woman would have progressed and would have discovered these cycles that form part of the biology of the person. And by discovering this, with a heart completely opened up to God and completely opened up to everybody else, and also opened up to the beauty of the world that has been created, and when they discovered that, they probably would have noticed that this was something that was given unto them. It's a gift. It's a gift so that they can participate personally, so that they can partake of the creative power of God, so that they can see that God is not just using them, so that they can see that God wants to bring together in them what has to do with the power of life and respect and fidelity and the gift of love. Well, so that they could see ultimately that what God wants is that to the extent that a bodily and intelligent being can partake of God, well, what he also wants is there to be a unity through the power by which life is communicated. In other words, the light of intelligence and the love for that person you want to communicate with according to your goodness and your perfection. Well, God is one, and He's a communion of persons. And St. Thomas, at a given point in time, said the following. He said that man comes from man like God comes from God. And God engenders eternally, and the eternal engendering of the Son is something that doesn't happen if God doesn't want it to. But, well, it doesn't stem from somebody's willingness, but rather it's a communication of divine nature according to all of the perfection and goodness of this nature in such a manner that in the life of God, what we have is the eternal generation of the Son. God, as is said, well, perhaps I'm mistaken now with the text, but the Father from whom the name is taken for all fatherhood in the world. And this is an archetype. It's a principle for all kinds of generations. So man comes from man like God comes from God. And we human beings come from the man and the woman. And not when they're two, but it's when it's only one. Because one of them comes from one. And the man doesn't come. Well, the new being that is born, the new human being, doesn't come from two when it's two, but rather from two when it's one. And when it's one, they represent the unity of that nature that is involved or that participates in this power of God that wants to communicate life, because God, this generative power, is completely associated to his infinite understanding, and we partake of this. And God wants the man and the woman to be only one. He wants them to be one, recognizing what they have in them to become one, so that the fact that they have to do is recognize what has been given unto them, and that they participate or they partake of a power, and they have to take on board the responsibility of what it means to have the possibility of producing a new life. And in this respect, the light of this theology, I think, can help us see what's going on. And we can see how by recognizing or how by discovering or by seeing or valuing these cycles, these natural rhythms that can be found in human beings, ultimately, these are things that make it possible to have a much better understanding of our dignity. That is the infinite courage we have in the eyes of God, and the responsibility that we've been given and in which we have to participate. Well, just to conclude this presentation, I would like us to bear this in mind, and perhaps what we would have to do is make an effort, especially those of us that are familiar with biology. with the biology of the cycles that could be found in the human reproductive functions or procreation functions. And what we have to do is communicate this in a very simple and straightforward manner. So we've been closely connected, or we've been highly dependent on the fact that this recognition, this natural recognition or natural awareness of fertility could also be linked to a natural regulation of fecundity. And at the same time, we perhaps have to deal with or address the artificial methods to prevent fertilization from happening. So that means that we have not noticed that this has been given to human beings so that they can discover it and value it and to respect the other person more. But we have to make an effort, I think, in order to try to explain these things in a simple manner, in such a manner that the wealth of biology together with medicine and with the different sciences that we have discovered, it should be possible to express this in common manner so that we can point this out to people as a whole, so that this can form part of our preaching, so that this can form part of our teachings at school and of our teachings at universities, and so that this can also form part of the recognition that has to be given to all of these people, both men and women, and more in particular women, because, well, here they are carrying a very precise signal of what God wanted, and that points out his creative goodness. The theology of the body, I think, casts a light on these dimensions and encourages us to discover or to recognize that these dimensions form part of a superior order. So all of this helps us go into much greater depth as regards the truth of God, because he wants the human being to have a command of him or herself. So the big falsehood of the Contraceptive Act mainly consists in transferring this dominion. In other words, this is something that should form part of the dominion or the command of the person. It becomes something else. And the rediscovery of the recognition of this, the fact that we can discover that we can read these fertility cycles goes to show that as they form part of the person, as they form part of what we have been given, so that this can assist our freedom, and so that we, in our subjectivity and with the same degree of enthusiasm with which we try to love others, and with the same enthusiasm, what we have to do is discover in that loved person all of these elements that form part of the wealth with which he or she receives us and we also give. So the natural recognition of fertility, therefore, can be situated in this order, in this superior order, in this new light. And by the way, it's related to the rest of the lights that are provided by the different sciences and the different disciplines. So from that perspective, natural recognition of fertility is a service. It's a service that we render for the human person, a service that we render according to what the Creator wanted. And we also provide this service, we render the service for mankind on the whole, so that the mandate of fertility on the earth can be fulfilled, and so that we can also allow human generations to progress. So, in other words, progressing or investigating on the natural recognition of fertility, on fertility awareness, it's something that ultimately favors God's generative power, and he wants all of the children that come to this world come here as the end result of a personal love of those people that love each other, know the truth of what God has written in their bodies, and they've read this with the help of the theologists, and I don't know why first the theologians, but anyway, with the help of the church, of the doctors, and with the help of psychologists, everybody at the service. So I'm sorry you have to stop, you have to finish now. But in any case, well, this is the participation of the creative power of God. God forms part of this, and He's the creator. He created human beings so that human beings can also participate in His prowess. And I think that God creates us first as a father, and we, in the order of creation, as personal beings, we can read what God has created by looking at what we have in our bodies, and in this manner, so that we can participate more and even better so that we can partake of His generative power. Thank you very much. Of course, I want to thank all the people that have organized this event, and many thanks indeed. And I would like to congratulate you too for having listened to me, and congratulations on your organization too. Thank you very much.